Welcome, everyone. My name is Jamie Hari, and welcome to today's Fireside chat about Azure Sentinel. I am Senior Director of Client Engagement here at Difenda. I'm going to introduce two guests today, Trent from Microsoft, and our own esteemed Manoj Arora, CEO and founder of Difenda. I'd love to invite everyone as we go through the process today of having a chat and learning about Azure Sentinel to ask questions. We're going to make this a very engaging and conversational session today, so please feel free to drop those questions that you have into the question and answer section, and we'll try and address them throughout the call if we can, and if not, we'll save a little bit of time at the end to address any questions you may have for our experts on the line. And if for whatever reason we don't have enough time, we'll certainly follow up with everyone after today's session with an email, which will provide you a link to today's session, which is being recorded, by the way, and also any questions we couldn't answer, and of course all of our contact information if you want to follow up and ask more detailed conversations after the fact. So again, I welcome you to ask those questions in the chat at any time. So welcome, thank you, and let's get started. All right. So first, I'd like to introduce Manoj Arora. He is the CEO and founder of Difenda. And let me just bring up the video for everyone today. All right. Hello, Manoj. And Manoj is the founder, as I mentioned, of Difenda, and he has a great deal of experience in the cybersecurity industry. First, many years ago, getting his engineering degree and operating as I believe, Manoj, the head of cybersecurity for a large bank in India, whose name shall remain nameless, perhaps. But thank you for joining us today and providing your expert guidance. And then I'd like to introduce also our esteemed guest from Microsoft, Mr. Trent. Also an expert in cybersecurity technology and specifically on Azure and Azure Sentinel, which we'll be talking about today. Rod, I don't know if you'll manage to make it into the conversation, but you're a big fan of the $6 Million Man, I guess, and the show, and also you're a recent grandfather. So congratulations to you and to your family. So without much further ado, I do want to jump right into talking about Azure Sentinel, the reason we're all here today. Just to set up some of the context around, obviously Azure Sentinel is a relatively new player to the space, but by no stretch a new technology in terms of development, which has been undergoing a great deal of work in the last several years. The first question I want to toss out there, just to get us started a little bit, Rod, is for you. I want to ask, what if some of the historical challenges or issues that have existed in the sort of, we'll call them legacy for lack of a better term, legacy SIEM products that spurred or caused Microsoft to develop the Azure Sentinel platform and some of the advantages that we've see it in it today?
Yeah, and that's an awesome question. Thank you so much. And first off, thank you, Manoj, for this opportunity. And just want to thank everyone that has joined today. I think this is awesome. There is so much interest in this product today, so I'm always happy to talk about my favorite thing in the world, besides $6 Million Man and my brand new grandson. Yeah, but some of those challenges, and kind of just to step back for a second before we kind of talk about those specific challenges, the reason why that we have kind of identified these challenges is because at Microsoft in the past, as you know, Azure Sentinel is kind of relatively a new product, right? A new SIEM, a new security tool. It's not been around forever, like all those other tools that people probably have taken note and probably have utilized. But as we started our own migration to the cloud, our own cloud journey, if you will, as a lot of our customers are doing these days, as we started to do that and we started to look at the security, the overall holistic security of the cloud, the reason why Azure Sentinel exists today, or at least development started on Azure Sentinel, or the interest and intent for it, was because of those gaps that we identified ourselves, right? So we internally use those same products that customers are probably continuing to use today, those things that are generally considered kind of on-premises, monolithic, almost beasts at this point, because they've kind of expanded their capability. But some of those gaps, and again, the reason why Azure Sentinel absolutely exists today is they're on premises. right? Yes, over time they gained the capability to pull data and stuff from cloud sources and things like that, or other devices. But these things have really, the landscape for these have really expanded over time. So not only that, but those organizations, our security folks, we should never turn our security folks into operations folks. Because of these types of on-premises tools, a lot of these security analysts would have to build out new architecture to hold more data and things like this. We essentially took our security folks away from their actual security jobs to even manage, update, and monitor the system or the security tool itself. Another piece of that, and even our Microsoft customers are probably familiar with that with our own security tools. It seems like there's a security tool or a security console literally for everything, every type of technology in the world. Microsoft, we do the same thing. Office 365 has its own security console. MCAS has its own security console. We're actually working really hard. In fact, we made an announcement today about information protection is now included in this kind of holistic, centralized view for security tools. But at the same time, these on-premises tools have never really adapted to that to be able to integrate very well with those other security tools. So while they're pulling in data and alerts and things from other sources, you still have to go to those other sources and utilize those other tools. So you're most likely working with, if you're working with an on-premises SIEM, you're still working with anywhere from 5, 10, 15 other consoles constantly, right? So that's a big burden. The other piece of this, and again, from an integration standpoint, one of the things that we determine as part of those gaps early on, particularly when there's so much noise in the system, or there's a way that analysts always seem to react the same way to specific incidents and events and things like that. This SOAR capability, which has really come to fore over the past 2 or 3 years, security orchestration, automation, remediation, it's literally just automating things within the system. These other tools have integrated those, but they're extra cost, they're add-ons, they need their own architecture. Again, turning our analysts into operations folks. And obviously different cost, and you still have to maintain and update these systems constantly. We felt, particularly for that, one of those gaps that we identified, and absolutely Azure Sentinel needed to have included as part of that development cycle, was that automated capability. So Azure Sentinel has built on top of some successful services. One of those is Logic Apps. So we provide the easy capability to produce automation around those things, how analysts react most commonly to certain scenarios, but also some really, even some new things that we've released recently around automation rules to make it really easy to create something very quick to help eliminate noise, but also, again, to help our analysts react and our security operations center to function more intelligently and just literally be able to adapt on the fly to whatever the circumstances are for the policies and procedures for that security team.
Yeah, that's interesting, Rod. And actually, I think you bring up an interesting point about not using analysts for security operations. In my mind, that leads to a bigger theme of what we'll call making security operations sustainable. So Manoj, my question for you is, in terms of a theme, or in terms of as a trend that you're seeing, what what benefits do you see from the sort of cloud first or cloud native tools that Azure and the rest of the Microsoft suite benefits down that path in terms of making security operations sustainable? What's your thoughts, Manoj?
Yeah, I think you got it absolutely spot on, Jamie, in terms of sustainability of security operations. If you look at last 10 big breaches, you will see that all those organizations had best of breed tools within their infrastructure, yet they failed to detect breach in the environment, and that's predominantly because SecOps in general is not sustainable. I think it's easy to talk about it, but then kind of implement it in real world. But I think three core principles that are extremely important as we look at new technologies, especially when it comes to SIEM and big data and SOAR automation, just too many things. I think simplicity is extremely important. Less is more. I think we have to look at consolidating our technology so we can do less. We can do more with less and be way more effective. The second part that we've seen now more than ever is scalability. Scalability is extremely important as well. In the traditional world where we had on-prem infrastructure, things like COVID happens and suddenly you're looking at people operating from all over the place. How do you scale, without having to place more orders and get more hardware and kind of do those things? I think scalability is extremely important. Our world is changing rapidly, and I think only thing that's changing faster than that is our cyber threat landscape. So I think another aspect is businesses are also flourishing. I think first time in human history we're seeing companies crossing $1 trillion in market cap. Implementations are getting bigger than ever. So I think scalability will continue to play a very important role. And third thing, like you mentioned, I highlighted, sustainability is extremely important as well. I think organizations are spending more time than ever on cybersecurity controls, and yet they're getting breached. And I think problem is really not with the product, but the problem is we have so much to do with so few resources. So I think what's contributed more towards that is we've added more products to the mix. We haven't really built any sustainable process and practices around SecOps in general. So I think those three are key features that we need to look at from what a modern solution should have. Things like artificial intelligence, things supported by Azure in terms of the Sentinel Fusion, EUBA, AI. So I think when you have these core capabilities, then the onus is on the implementer to make sure they can extract the best value out of these things. They're properly implemented, and they can scale across the organization.
Thank you, Manoj. And actually, there's a question that came in from the audience, and it builds right on that point. Is does Azure Sentinel, or does the sort of platform focus primarily on sort of monitoring and securing the cloud, or does it reach into on-premise assets? And Rod, maybe this is something I'll toss back to you. When we think about the way that we've changed to working from home and sort of the change of the perimeter, the security perimeter, the four walls of the office, can you maybe expound a little bit on how Azure Sentinel reaches into on-prem and hybrid environments, and what other capabilities customers should be looking for in a modern solution?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really believe we have the most excellent story here, right? So customers should have seen, or potential customers should have seen over the past year with our, our analyst reporting, our financials and things like this. I mean, that's one indicator, but really it's kind of an internal thing that we have been developing and working on from a security posture perspective or security platform perspective. When you look at Azure Sentinel, right? So we have created this platform, which I like to refer to as a security platform that literally customers connect anything from anywhere and any type of format, any file format, to be able to connect to Azure Sentinel. Our goal is not that we're going to create this Microsoft way of doing things, which I'm sure a lot of people feel that we've done in the past. We essentially just want our customers to be able to secure their environment however that happens, right? So we're going to provide the tools to be able to do that. Azure Sentinel, specifically speaking to this specific topic, Azure Sentinel absolutely is going to be awesome with Azure. It's absolutely going to be awesome with the Microsoft tools, because we know, right, through those APIs and things, how to capture and gather that information. But Azure Sentinel, again, is built as a platform so customers can connect every bit of their environment. It doesn't matter if you're on premises, right? If you're wanting your Active Directory information, ADFS, whatever it happens to be, maybe you have a Palo Alto set of Palo Alto switches, maybe you're a Cisco shop, you should be able to connect all of that to Azure Sentinel, to this cloud, to this type of tool. And if you're not able to do that, then your tool absolutely will literally fail. The additional piece of that is not just for the hybrid on-prem cloud model, but Azure Sentinel supports connections from other clouds. We make it easy to connect to AWS, those customers that are multi-cloud. I generally refer to Azure Sentinel as the tofu of security tools. If you're not familiar with what tofu is, you literally take tofu, you cook it into whatever you want to cook it with, and it takes on that flavor. Azure Sentinel is exactly the same way, right? It's not the Microsoft way of connecting things. It's literally just a common, sustainable, industry standard way of connecting sources. And when customers do that, like tofu, 3 months from now, it becomes that customer's tool. It looks exactly like their environment. It looks exactly like their security team wants to be able to manage security operations for their environment. It becomes their tool, which is actually pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And one of the things that Difenda does, I think, very well is providing professional services around Microsoft products and services, including the ability to develop integrations or automations with Azure Sentinel if they don't exist today. But I do want to talk very briefly about what Microsoft is doing in terms of making, to your point, the platform more connectable. So if you're familiar with Azure Sentinel, if you've had the opportunity to play with it, in some of the areas you're able to just choose connectors that already exist. There's an existing library that grows, and keep me honest here, Rod, that grows all the time with new connections as they're being for new vendors, new technology platforms, or even just keeping up to date with API changes. So APIs, syslog, and all the other ways that we've connected CEF like Ceph logs. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about how Microsoft and others are able to get more sources into Azure Sentinel? And then also there's a question that's sort of related to this. Well, actually, there's a couple of questions that are coming in from the chat that are related to this. So the first is, can it query sources outside of log analytics, such as third party? And we kind of started to dabble on that. And then the other question that's related is a big challenge from work from home is identity access management and user and person validation. Can you tell us a little about not only how we get more log sources of various sizes, but how Azure Sentinel interfaces with LDAP, SAML, and some of the other IAM tools?
Right. Yep, that's a very good question. So just kind of initially to talk about how we connect data, right? You talked about syslog and the API and things like that. We have what's built into Azure Sentinel, what we call data connectors. You could deploy Azure Sentinel and literally have no data connector ever provided, but out of the box, we provide a number of those. All of these data connectors have come directly from customer request. And the reason why that we create data connectors is because once you go into one and take a look at what it looks like, we make it extremely easy to connect the data. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for our customers to connect all their data, right? So some of them are just a couple check boxes to enable things, like an Office 365 service or something like that. The other things, so like syslog, if you go into something like a Palo Alto data connector, it's going to have all of the steps provided to you how to enable that within your environment. Build a syslog server, install this agent, point this agent to the right space. It's going to have that. But understanding, again, this is not the Microsoft way of connecting things. The guidance that's provided in these data connectors actually comes from that vendor, from Palo Alto itself. So all of the guidance that are there, there's even a link on that data connector page that says, well, if you have questions, click this, and it takes you to Palo Alto's site to give you more information. Again, we're trying to create something that's easy to connect and that's sustainable. That's not the Microsoft way of doing it. We're trying to utilize guidance that's going to be available to be able to utilize throughout the life of your environment and your security teams using this product. The other question I think I heard there, and there was another question, you have to remind me, but querying data outside of Azure Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel is built on, I mentioned earlier, some existing services. One of those I said was Logic Apps for the automation. It's also built on some other services, Azure Monitor, also Log Analytics Workspaces. That exposes the query language to us for security purposes for Azure Sentinel. That query language, if you're not familiar, is called KQL, or Custo Query Language. That is a very specific query language, very simple, very easy to understand. I always kind of refer to it as like SQL or SQL Plus, because it's kind of an offshoot of what that is, but we've done some things to make it well performing because we're utilizing cloud resources and things like that. You can query sources outside of Azure Sentinel, but those would have to follow and have to support that KQL query language. Like we have some new data lake clustering service, or relatively new, Azure Data Explorer, right? So you can use something like Azure Data Explorer for long-term storage, and you can still query. So you can query current data with archive data and things like that. But to query that information or collect those logs from other sources, we literally just need to be able to ingest that into the cloud, into this log analytics workspace for Azure Sentinel. If that data exists there, we can query it. We can create analysis against that data. We can run our automations. We can produce those events and alerts and be notified when there are potential threats within our environment.
So thank you, Rod. And just to touch very briefly, I think the second question there was just pertaining to LDAP, SAML,
Yes.
other authentication mechanisms. And I think you did touch on that a little bit. But is there anything you'd want to add specifically around, and I realize LDAP, SAML, and some of the authentication pieces, but how about IAM specifically? Is there anything you can add there?
So anyone that's been in operations or IT, if you want to call it that, for any length of time, every device, every service, every application, everything logs something somewhere for every transaction. As long as we can get that log source ingested into this log analytics workspace for Azure Sentinel, just like any other SIEM, as long as we can locate that log and get that ingested here, then you literally have all of that information connected to Azure Sentinel.
Perfect, thank you. And Manoj, my next question is for you. Obviously, we've been talking about a lot of the developments Microsoft has been making, a lot of the investments, and the other bit, of course, is the interconnectivity. We're talking, Azure Sentinel is, as Rod mentioned, not intended to be the Microsoft way. It's however Palo Alto and the others we keep picking on, work. So my question to you is really about how can you tell us a little bit about how Difenda sort of saw the changing tides and how we got involved in Microsoft in early 2018 and sort of helped push this sort of Azure Sentinel platform forward. And second of all, why we even why we chose Microsoft. We obviously had been working previously with other providers in the past and done very well. So why did we see the writing on the wall for Microsoft? You can tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So this is a couple of years back, and we were plugging away in our office trying to look at what's the next best way of delivering value to our customers. And at that point, we had just partnered up with Microsoft, and the design team from Israel was there in Toronto, and they wanted to see how does a SOC operate, like what did they do, and just to understand what are some of the ground realities that customers and service providers face. And I think that started our engagement. It was they provided us insights into what's coming down the pipe. We provided them with some of our knowledge on how we've struggled in accomplishing some of the goals and objectives that our customers have wanted, and through that interaction, we became part of the design team, and we got more insights into the core working of the product itself, and it was very exciting because everything that was being spoken about in more of, at a 30,000 feet level was now being put into play, was actually being implemented within the platform, and those capabilities were being developed as native capabilities within the platform itself, within the Sentinel platform. And when you look at what are the core components required, to orchestrate some of the response capabilities, it was all very native. So that's one part of it that really pushed us towards this looks very compelling. And we did not take it from Microsoft perspective. We looked at purely from what's required today to deliver our customers maximum value and the outcome that they are expecting. And given the fact that they had most of the customers have had a substantial footprint with Microsoft, using different products, and the way it integrated across different components of security infrastructure, it made absolute sense for us to basically take the message to our customers, and beyond that is actually deliver it for our customers so they can extract value and outcome out of it, rather than getting lost between another piece of technology being thrown at them without them having an idea of how do I extract maximum value out of it.
That's a very good point, Manoj, and if I can actually touch on that around maximum value. Rod, this next question is kind of more for you, and we talked about Azure Sentinel not being just the Microsoft way, but one of the really beneficial values, in my opinion, of the platform is that it ingests logs from Microsoft sources at either reduced or no cost. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how it plays into the sort of economics of the solution in terms of total cost of ownership?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, interesting point. Understanding that over the past couple of years, I mean, Azure Sentinel is my 100% focus, right? So I literally work with this tool every single day. And as such, you can imagine the number of customers that I've worked with over that 2-year period of time. Azure Sentinel, again, is kind of this new kid on the block. There's a lot of interest, but customers have literally used other products forever. They have a lot of investment in resources, whether it's personnel or learning or knowledge or things like this, around the queries that are inherent to those specific tools, right? So they have a lot of knowledge there. They're looking at Azure Sentinel as something to help them with costs. I can't tell you the number of customers that I've worked with over that 2-year period of time that do have an on-premises SIEM, but then they will deploy Azure Sentinel because you talked about those free sources, data sources. A few of those, I'll probably forget some of them, but it's Azure Activity, Office 365 is a free ingestive source, all of the alerts from our Defender products, Defender now instead of all those multitude of different product names that we had before. Those are all free and those are all cloud-based. So when you think about egress and cost of egress and getting things from the cloud into on-premises, that's can be a pretty substantial cost depending on the number of users and things like that you have in your environment. By just taking advantage of the capability of Azure Sentinel based on those free resources or those free sources to ingest from those services, a lot of customers will run Azure Sentinel and their on-premises tool side by side, and that is enough cost savings in it alone to keep running these things side by side. Of course, by doing so, Azure Sentinel is absolutely so wonderful to utilize. A lot of customers, right? They're fine running them side by side, but they also kind of look at Azure Sentinel after using it for a while and getting used to kind of the modern way of doing things. It becomes a little bit more appealing, right? And they start thinking maybe we should migrate this stuff. As we start migrating more workloads to the cloud, let's start shifting our resources and shifting our focus on Azure Sentinel. So again, a lot of free stuff you get with Azure Sentinel, but Azure Sentinel is so unique and so powerful with the artificial intelligence and machine learning that it will expose things in your data that these other kind of legacy modeled tools will not. So they'll keep Azure Sentinel in place, let Azure Sentinel do its job, and then sometimes customers will they'll just move the alerts from Azure Sentinel to their on-premises SIEM for a while, so they can kind of focus on that single pane of glass, but still employing Azure Sentinel to allow it to do its fantastic job of analyzing that data.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rod. And Manoj, kind of almost the same question to you. In terms of customer conversations that you've had, obviously we have a unique perspective at Difenda in terms of the breadth of products and services available in the market. What have you seen and what conversations have you had around the idea of the platform being a savings or a net financial benefit to customers in terms of their security operations?
Yeah, and I think this is an evolving conversation, Jamie, as customers are realizing the power and potential of Azure Sentinel and the entire ecosystem, the security ecosystem that Microsoft brings to the table. They are starting to understand that with a single stack, they can accomplish simplicity, and they can basically consolidate their tools into a single platform. And gain that visibility they need. And I kind of spoke about scalability and sustainability and simplicity. So when that's been our conversation with our customers too, where they are looking at how do I, what's going to be my total cost of ownership? What's my return on investment? And when you start putting together, their move to cloud, especially with customers who are already invested on Azure cloud, the amount of visibility they gain without spending a single dollar has immense value in itself. And then you start adding different tiers to it when you look at, from an EDR perspective, when it comes to capability, they are not losing any capability if they consolidate, more tools within the Microsoft stack itself. There is more savings, there's more ROI, and what we've seen is overall, it takes them and puts them in a much better state of maturity when it comes to dealing with threats and having that visibility in itself. So, and when it comes to cybersecurity, the ROI and TCO, it's a tricky conversation too, right? Like if you are able to mitigate those trivial alerts and those trivial threats happening in your environment, you are actually preventing yourself from a more catastrophic event from happening. And it's very hard to put dollars and cents around it. So while the conventional way of looking at it is just look at the tool, look at the return, look at how do we overall run and how does it simplify our operational capability, from that perspective it makes sense. But I think just given the fact that you have more control over your environment, you have more visibility, and you're able to orchestrate or reduce your false positives significantly because the tool has the capability to work across the ecosystem, that in itself has immense value, Jamie.
Thank you, Manoj, and I do agree. And it's interesting, Rod, you and I had a conversation maybe last week, and you had brought up a particular anecdote where you were speaking with a customer, and we won't mention the name of the other SIEM or product that was being used, but one of the things I want to talk about is sort of dispelling the sort of myth of numerical superiority. So what I mean by that is, if I have 100 use cases in my SIEM, I have better detection capability than if I have 99 use cases in my SIEM. So I think you had mentioned something where a customer, or perhaps just another person you were talking to, had mentioned that they believed that the technology was superior just based on the use cases or analytics rules. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe why that's a myth, or things you've seen around in that area?
Yeah, and that's funny that you mentioned that. And the number was actually 900, right? So we were talking with a customer who's very comfortable with the tool that they were using. This particular tool, the number of customers that I've worked with, it's very easy to kind of compare Azure Sentinel to this tool, literally just by on the query language alone, and the amount of time it takes for that query to return results. But yeah, that's one of the I think misconceptions, where they look at their tool and they're like, wow, we have 900 use cases. It's analyzing 900 things. Well, if you start taking a look at that, some of those are 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. Those are old use cases. Some of them never ever see anything about the data, or never see events in the data that they're collecting. So maybe probably about 1% of those they ever get alerts on. So numerical value is not necessarily what organizations need to look at. When you think of it from a modern, and I'm not even talking about Azure Sentinel here, right? We won't even focus on that. From a modern SIEM perspective, your tool should be able to look through your data and expose not just the alerts and the events and the occurrences. It should be able to tie those things together intelligently to show you the entire escalation chain of that event or that occurrence. Azure Sentinel, absolutely, based on those gaps that we identified, I talked about earlier, it absolutely does look through those various log sources and takes some maybe low fidelity occurrences and ties it together. So a modern SIEM needs to react and act a little bit more intelligently. Azure Sentinel, because of the artificial intelligence, because of the machine learning. Yesterday, we announced another new feature for machine learning. In fact, from our RSA announcements yesterday, I think there were 32 new enhancements or features in Azure Sentinel as of yesterday morning. And one of those was around some of this machine learning and kind of building out your own stuff, right? So your environment better than we do. So you can build this stuff out on your own. But this tool should be able to be intelligent enough to know what your environment looks like, to know what your end user habits are. So it produces this storyline of what happened versus just, like I said, alerts and events that just on their own seem a little bit meaningless, right? So even a couple of our analytics rules is what we call them, these rules that analyze the data. One of those is called Fusion. I think I forget the number now, but instead of having 900 separate alert rules, right? We have one that literally has, tens of, whatever included in it. It works more intelligent because this one analytics rule goes out and looks at the entire kill chain and finds and pulls that stuff out and puts it together for you.
Thank you. And if I can build on that a little bit, there's actually a question in the chat. So what about Unix, Linux, Mac OS, and how is some of that data brought in, normalized, and used to correlate? But if I want to just jump off that question a little bit, so the idea is, and I think what you just talked about and what this question is we really want universal visibility. Truly, it doesn't really matter the source. It really doesn't matter that the nature of the data. At the end of the day, as long as it's machine readable, there may be more effort in terms of normalizing and parsing it, but it's all usable. Can you tell us a little bit about sort of the way we've historically done very signature-based use cases, and something we haven't really touched a lot on right now is MITRE ATT&CK and the concept of more agnostic detection and communicating in more tactics and techniques like reconnaissance and privilege escalation, as opposed to, Palo Alto version 8.1 has a vulnerability. Let's watch for that specific. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
So we do utilize, and I don't know how many people know this, but well, particularly those people that have never seen the Azure Sentinel console, our analytics rules, our hunting queries and things like that, the capability built into Azure Sentinel is based on the MITRE.org, this framework, right? So again, we're not creating the Microsoft way of doing things or creating severity levels around events and alerts and things like this. We're using things that are industry standard. So our hunting queries, our analytics rules, we use that same categorization that many SIEMs do or many security tools do. We use MITRE.org. In fact, you can use your own, bring your own as well. If you use something other than MITRE.org, there's ways of doing that. So you can classify how these alerts look, classify the severity so that as a security team, you are able to focus exactly what you need to be focused on instead of just looking at a bunch of low fidelity or low severity or informational type of alerts.
Absolutely, thank you. And Manoj, so one of the things that Difenda as a managed security service provider, we're constantly challenged with is making sure that we have enough people and they're trained and working on the right tasks. How do we here at Difenda leverage automation and orchestration to make ourselves more efficient? And how does the platform, in theory, I guess to your point, to that same point, like make other customers benefit from that? So I guess my question is, if we're looking at machines to replace humans everywhere, how does Azure Sentinel and the automation and orchestration tools it provides make us better, more sustainable security operations?
Right, and this is a very tricky question because everybody talks about using automation, orchestration, SOAR, but there's method to the madness, right? Everybody wants to weed out false positives, which is easier said than done because it's a very meticulous process which requires highest level of visibility, correlation, and validation, and it all has to happen at a real time or in real time. So really what it comes down to, all the important components in order to make that happen. Compute is important, scale is important, telemetry is important, threat intelligence is important. So when you start bringing all these features together and you want to make sure you're extracting value on a real-time basis, that's where the only way to do it is through automation and through orchestration. So and the goal really is that out of all these alerts coming in, if we can weed out false positives as responsibly as we can, that's half of the battle. And the second component to it is really looking at these low fidelity alerts, which really have a small action or a basic action that needs to be taken in order to kind of mitigate and close that event. I'll give you an example. There's a blacklisted IP shows up, and there's nothing benign happening at an underlying operating system level. But if we can block that IP, that ticket can be closed and it can be put aside. That frees up the time for our analysts to look at those 5% or 3 to 5% of real alerts that are more hidden or more nefarious in nature, which have the capability to cause bigger problems, or to observe patterns which are not really obvious and in our face, where we can look at where our threat hunting team can actually go in and look at real problem. And this also allows the customers really to take take a breather, like they're not getting these high fidelity 25, 30, 50 alerts a day, and their teams are struggling with alert fatigue. That allows them as well to gain visibility into what's happening, what is Defender doing, which alerts popped up, which were closed through automation, what happened. So they have full visibility, and that also allows them to really look at those 4 or 5% of real problems in the environment that Defender's team is working on, and they'll get escalations as they need in order to basically ensure that there's least damage possible, because there's no way any organization can assure that they'll never be breached. But our objective is to detect a problem as quickly as we possibly can and reduce the material damage to the least amount of extent we can.
That makes good sense, and I think that's certainly the goal of every CISO on the planet. Is at this point we all realize breach is inevitable, so it's about reducing the likelihood, reducing the impact when it does happen. So speaking about Rod, I'm going to turn a little bit to the future now and ask you broadly, what is the future in your opinion? And I realize there's a bit of a crystal ball, futurism here, but what would you say is the future of SIEM and SOAR for threat detection and response? You mentioned a few new features, but putting that aside, bigger picture, where do you see this technology moving and this whole area going?
So we've talked about kind of in this kind of most recent segment about automation. I believe there will be newer and different types of automation. Understanding that, I still believe, going back to the movie Jurassic Park, if you remember, there was that quote about scientists were so excited about they didn't,
stop to think if they should.
Yeah, they didn't stop to think if they should. And that's the way we kind of approach automation, right? You don't want to automate everything, otherwise you lose control and you lose insight into the environment. I think from that perspective, automation is going to become more intelligent. It's going to become more intuitive, right? So it's going to give you descriptors and things. This is where a great place is going to give you suggestions. I think from that perspective, we'll look at some additional artificial intelligence, machine learning. There will be some capabilities in the product. I was joking last week, and it turned into a really good joke. And then to find out some people are actually working on this, like an analyst assistant, kind of like Clippy in Azure Sentinel or something, where you're working on something, because that tends to be once a customer rolls out Azure Sentinel, maybe they're SOC new, right? And they've never kind of had these processes into place before. Okay, I have these alerts. What do I do next? And so that's a lot of the questions. So we'll lead them through those discussions and help build their processes and things like that. Released yesterday or day before was a new workbook for Azure Sentinel that, oh my goodness, it's amazing. Good friend of mine, good colleague, developed this thing. It's a SOC framework, right? So that's kind of leading down that path to help customers understand what to do next, how to go through this whole triage process all the way through investigation. But I think that's going to be built more intuitively into the product itself, or these types of products, right? Because there's going to be a lot of individuals who are either new to this process, new to these different types of tools and things like this, that really need that guidance. And because security is always a moving target, there's going to be additional knowledge and learning that needs to be done along the way. So how best to accomplish that? By providing some intelligence built into this stuff to help our customers understand how to secure their investments, right?
That makes sense. And if I'm going to toss a question to both of you just to sort of set up my next question, which is, if you had to pick 2 or 3 criteria, what would they be for customers to self-identify? I need Azure Sentinel. So I already have a SIEM, obviously, so it should be something you're investigating as a competitive option, sure. But what other situations, and I'll toss it to you first, Manoj, would you say Azure Sentinel needs to be something that you need to look at like right away?
I think one of the important criteria is most of the customers are pretty much operating in a hybrid mode with on-prem and cloud presence. and cloud getting into multi-cloud. I think customers who are in or qualify for that category should look at Azure Sentinel, because it's got the ability to kind of not just address the conventional infrastructure and just logs traditional SIEMs do, but also address cloud in a very comprehensive manner. And I think that's one. And two, I think customers, especially with COVID, as they've become more distributed and operating across multiple sites, and there's really no limitation to having a site-centric solution in place. I think customers dealing with those challenges where they're looking at, how do I now bring logs from all these disparate sources located across different places, across the geography. I think they will find a lot of value as a cloud native SIEM solution. And if they have a significant footprint with Microsoft, I think there's a lot of value that can be leveraged through just what's available with default logging levels and the default log ingestion possible without really spending a dollar on additional tool sets.
That's a great answer, Manoj. Anything you want to add to that, Rod, if you can?
Well, literally it boils down to this, right? If your tool is the problem, then you probably want to kind of take a look at Azure Sentinel. If customers are tired of being operations, security folks are tired of being operation folks, right? If your tool is too noisy, it's literally generating an alert every time there's some kind of security event, for every security event, then it's obviously a problem. A lot of these tools, because again, they've been around for a while and they've not really done a great job of adapting to kind of modern operations, they've turned a lot of those normal security operations. Hunting is a great example, still a manual process, still critical to operations, still needs to be done. But because it's inefficient in these tools, customers literally stop doing it. And at that point, your security team and that tool actually has become your gap in security. And if that's the case, it's time to do something just a little bit differently. From an operations standpoint, right? When every day that a person goes into Azure Sentinel, an analyst goes into Azure Sentinel, because it's built on this Azure, because it's built on this DevOps pipeline, they're always using the most current version of the console. They're always using the most current threat intel. It's not like they have to stop in the morning, rebuild something, do an update, or whatever it happens to be. They're always using the most current information so that they can secure their environment. So if your tool is the problem, if you walk into work every morning like, oh my goodness, do I have to dig through this event again? Maybe it's time to think about doing things a little bit better.
For sure, and I know there's at least a few people that are feeling that way for sure. If I can, there's a question that came in, and I'm going to build on the question. So Rod, I'm going to get you to answer first if I can. The question in the chat is, can we configure or install decoy servers for threat detection? But I do want to expand the question out a little bit. We haven't talked a ton about threat intelligence, decoy servers or honeypots or various analogous situations. Can you tell us a little bit about Azure Sentinel and how it would either use honeypots or similar technologies, and some of the benefits of the native inbuilt threat intelligence?
Right. So we'll kind of start with the threat intel perspective. So Azure Sentinel, obviously, those customers that have utilized those other products for a period of time, they have built up a list of trusted sources, right? Whether it's where they get their news about the latest threat or things in respect to that, or a lot of people have their trusted sources for threat intelligence, whether it's a platform, sticks, or different third-party crowdsourced sources. Azure Sentinel absolutely supports the ability for customers to be able to bring their own threat intel. We support taxi and sticks, so those same sources that they've been able to utilize for however long they've utilized them, they could still use those in Azure Sentinel. There's no gap. And also built into Azure Sentinel, the ability to include your own threat intel. If part of your operations today, you found a range of IP addresses you don't want your users to visit anymore because it's potentially nefarious, never been reported before, maybe you found it, maybe with comments, maybe you can name it yourself or something like that, but you can include that into Azure Sentinel as a one-off situation specific to your environment. So that threat intel, another piece of that threat intel, which a lot of our customers don't actually realize a lot of the times, as customers use our products, Office 365, some of our security products, some of our other services. There are signals of threat intelligence that are built from those that are always and continuously and constantly fed back into our security products. So if through usage of Office 365, it was identified that there's some nefarious domain out there somewhere, it's going to be fed back into the system, right? So you're always using the most current threat intel. Customers don't realize, but all of our tools are security services. Something like Bing, if a customer uses Bing, it is actually a security tool. It's going to pull in some of those signals or those threat signals if it finds those, and that's part of one of those signals that would be fed back into the system.
A quick question for my own knowledge, is that part of EUBA or is that its own thing?
So UEBA is a little bit different. There's user entity behavior analytics. This is built into Azure Sentinel. It's something that runs in the background all the time. It looks at and it kind of profiles user accounts, host names, and now released yesterday, also IP addresses. Really easy in Azure Sentinel to go in, click in and take a look at over a period of time that you select, 30 days, 60 days, whatever, as long as you have that data to look at what that entity, whatever it was, has done over that period of time. As an analyst, UEBA is awesome because it gives me a comfortability, hopefully, or an understanding of what that entity has done over that period of time to figure out what they were captured in this latest event, if they should have been able to have done that, or if it might potentially be a compromised account. Really easy to do with that. So that's something that just literally runs constantly on the back end with Azure, for Azure Sentinel, that just runs. You don't have to do anything with it to manage or monitor it at all.
That makes sense, and I think we're heading definitely down that direction. So we are just 8 minutes away from the end here. So I do want to. There's one or two more questions in the chat that I will address at the end. But Manoj, before I get to those, I do want to ask sort of one last question in your direction, which is if I'm new to Azure Sentinel, or if I don't have Azure Sentinel yet, and I've heard something that's interesting, or I've identified, yeah, that sounds like something I could use, how would you say, and you mentioned it earlier, Rod, kind of running it side by side, how would you recommend someone get started?
Yeah, that's a great point, Jamie. I think it's essential. I highly recommend customers or potential customers to really test it out. Test out the product, test out its fit. Run a controlled POC with clearly laid out success criteria, and test it out in the environment. And Jamie, you can elaborate further on this, but I think that is where you are able to validate the product's fit in your environment as closely as you can. And the best part really is this is a subscription. They're not really buying or committing themselves to buying hardware, software, services. This is, if there's value, you keep going. If there's no value, you stop, you scale down. Just the options are open.
Absolutely. And to that point, Manoj, thank you. I think one of the things that we want to offer everyone today on the call, and you will learn more about this in the email that follows, but for everyone on the call, if you are interested in an Azure Sentinel proof of concept, we are running that at no cost to anyone who's on today's call. Includes a free implementation of a basic Azure Sentinel configuration performed by Difenda's Azure Sentinel experts in conjunction with experts like Rod from Microsoft. And then, of course, as Rod mentioned earlier, the log sources, if you're using Microsoft, are at no cost. So the actual cost of the proof of concept is nothing to you, and it's something we can run side by side if you already have a solution. So certainly reach out to anyone from the Difenda sales team, which we'll show at the end, sales@difenda.com if you're interested, or certainly when we send that email, just certainly reply to that. So that's obviously where we want to drive everyone to do today, is give it a try. And if you don't like it, certainly there's no cost for the proof of concept, but I think you'll be impressed by not only all of the native cloud-centric features that we've been talking about today, but some of the features that have been teased by Rod, as being released just yesterday. And there is actually one question more in the chat, and someone has asked, Rod, I know you're probably seeing this question coming, but is there anything, behind the covers or behind the sheets that you can perhaps share with us today on this call that isn't yet public, or anything that you can allude to without, a wink and a nod?
Oh, let's see. So there's oh my goodness. So because I talked about that DevOps pipeline, there is constant development. As with anything within Azure, Azure Sentinel features are released. It gives people whiplash. They look in the console one day and it looks like this. The next day they go in like, oh my goodness, there's a new feature and it's amazing. Can I tease any upcoming? No, I'd get in trouble. But at the same time, the things that were released yesterday, oh my goodness, look at this stuff. Like something like one of the features that was released yesterday in preview is the ability to go into an incident and create a Teams channel for your war room, which is amazing. Look at the integration. We talked about lack of integration earlier with those other tools. Look at this. Oh my goodness, you're able to use Teams as your war room for an investigation or a threat within your environment. So that by using Teams, that goes across your entire environment, not just your security phone. Sorry, I get excited about these things, but go take a look at the things that were announced yesterday. None of them are insignificant at all.
Okay, well, we certainly wouldn't want to get you in trouble, Rod. We'd love to have you back another time. So we'll maybe leave it at that. But there is one more question in the chat. And if there's anyone else that has any last minute questions, please do try squeeze them in right now. But there's one more question that's in the chat that we haven't addressed yet. It's what is the cost optimal solution? And I realize this might get a little detailed in pricing. So let's maybe keep it general if we can. But what is the cost optimal solution for moving data from Sentinel, considering there's a 30-day and 90-day storage limit? So I think if I can interpret the question, there's sort of the concept of hot data kept inside the Azure Sentinel workspace, and then there's data that beyond the capability. And I don't believe it's actually 30 days. I think 2 years is the limit you can keep in the hot sort of storage. But what is a cost-effective solution for keeping data beyond that? Would be my question to you.
Right. So if you understand the services that we're utilizing here, Log Analytics Workspace is what I call our stretchy bucket, right? This is where that data fits, where you don't have to build out data storage anymore. It just literally accommodates whatever your data requirements are. Default, when you stand up a Log Analytics Workspace, is 30 days. That's data retention. When you Azure Sentinel enable a Log Analytics Workspace, you get 90 days of free. So your hot or your active data is 90 days worth of data. Customers obviously have policies, compliance, and things that they have to meet, requirements that they need to store data for longer periods of time. The beauty about this solution, because of how we expose through Azure Monitor and the KQL query language, you can create export rules. So as that data expires every 90 days, data's in, 90 days it expires out, you can export that data to what's called Azure Data Explorer, which is an ADX cluster, right? Same type of storage as Log Analytics Workspace. So you're sending this stuff to archive storage. It's cheaper storage. You can store it. I think the default when you enable a cluster is 99 years, right? So, hey, you can store it, but you can literally store it as long as you want. The beauty of this versus another product that might be even close to being similar is that you can query active and archive data utilizing the same query language. It's not like it's cold storage where you have to mount it so that you can query against it. You can query against it anytime. So you can actually query your archive data along with your hot or your current data at the same time. So not only is it more cost effective to export that stuff, but you can still get to it, right? So that's important, particularly for organizations that need, the auditor comes in and says, okay, let's look at some of the history of the Security Operations Center. Let's look at some of this privacy data and things like this. You're always able to get to it.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm going to just jump on that. There's a couple more questions that are coming in. One related to that. Is it safe to assume to use one Log Analytics Workspace for everything? Example, security, Azure Monitor, etc. So the normal Microsoft answer to something like that is it depends. There's a multitude of reasons why an organization might want multiple Log Analytics Workspaces. There's compliance. There's privacy information. Maybe HR doesn't want your certain unvetted security analyst to be able to view the CEO's salary information or whatever if it happens to be in that stream. There's a multitude of reasons why you might. Best practice would absolutely to try as much as possible to have one Log Analytics Workspace because it's much easier to manage the access, who has access, because at that point you're utilizing a resource group, applying access and things like that.
Also, the billing goes to one location instead of like a multitude of different locations sometimes. So it's a much simpler method to be able to do that. So yeah, best practice, yes, but there are many occasions where that's not capable.
Okay, well, I understand, and I do also hate giving the it depends answer, but you're right, there are a lot of variables and factors. It's possible, obviously, to use one, but there are scenarios where you wouldn't want to. We are now wrapping up. It is 3 p.m. There are a couple more questions. What maybe we can do is we can try and steal a few more of your minutes, Rod, to just try and answer those. But just thank you to everyone who's been able to attend so far. Obviously, we appreciate it. As I mentioned, the session today has been recorded and will be available for you to review after the fact. And of course, I'd like to remind everyone about the Azure Sentinel proof of concept. Whether you have another SIEM in place today or not, certainly reach out to Difenda Sales, and we'll be happy to help you through the process of getting that started at no cost. And again, thank you to Manoj and thank you to Rod for joining us today on this session. And any questions we weren't able to get to today, we will still try and get those answers for you, and then we'll publish those in an email that we send out afterwards. So thank you again for everyone for joining, and have a wonderful afternoon. Take care.